Okay, so this time we're using this RoleCatcher guide to do a deep dive into biochemical engineering. It seems like you want to go beyond just mixing chemicals and really understand how the building blocks of life can be used to solve real-world problems.
Yeah. And it's a field that's really exploding right now. We're seeing more and more applications in healthcare, agriculture, energy, even tackling big issues like climate change.
Definitely not just your typical lab coats and beakers anymore.
Right. It's way beyond that now.
This guide really digs into what a biochemical engineer actually does. It seems like they're the bridge between all those amazing scientific discoveries you read about and making them actually useful out there in the real world.
Exactly. They're the ones turning those aha moments into something tangible.
It's like taking, say, cutting-edge research on cell regeneration and then actually using that to find a way to repair damaged tissue.
Exactly. The kind of tangible impact.
It's like science fiction becoming reality. Which reminds me, this guide doesn't shy away from the real-world pros and cons of this career path.
Yeah, it gets into the nitty-gritty for sure.
On the plus side, it sounds like you could earn a pretty comfortable living, right?
Oh, absolutely. And beyond the salary, the work itself is really driven by innovation. Can you imagine the satisfaction of knowing that what you do every day could help develop something like a life-saving vaccine?
Or a new source of clean fuel.
Exactly. That's got to be a powerful motivator.
Totally. But it's not all glamorous, right? This guide mentions needing a very strong educational background. We're talking specialized degrees, maybe even a PhD, and then on top of that, there's the whole competitive job market to deal with.
Yeah, you really have to be committed to this path.
And that's not even the half of it. Biochemical engineers need to be constantly learning.
Oh, for sure. It's a field that's constantly evolving.
The technology is advancing so rapidly. Think about things like gene editing with CRISPR or using AI to make sense of these massive amounts of data. That's the kind of cutting-edge stuff that you need to keep up with.
It's a steep learning curve, but that's part of what makes it so exciting.
It's a field that really demands continuous growth, always sharpening your skills. This guide even gave some examples of what kinds of questions to expect in a job interview, which I thought was really interesting.
Oh yeah, like a sneak peek into the interview room.
Exactly. They mention questions about designing experiments, which makes sense when you're dealing with such intricate
Right,
systems.
you've got to think on a whole different level.
And since safety is obviously critical, they also mention questions about working with potentially dangerous materials. You really need to prove you can handle that kind of responsibility.
Absolutely. No room for error there.
It's serious stuff. They also asked about staying updated on advancements, so clearly being a lifelong learner is a must in this field.
No question. You can't just rest on what you learned in school.
Right. It's all about continuous learning and improvement. And it's not just about the technical stuff either. This guide touched on how biochemical engineers also need to be really good communicators
Oh, that's so important.
because they're often collaborating with other scientists, but they might also need to explain these complex topics to people who don't have a scientific background.
Exactly. Like explaining your research to potential investors or even just to the public.
So you need to be able to explain things in a way that everyone can understand, whether you're in the lab or presenting your findings to a room full of executives. It's not just one straight career path either. This guide highlighted how you can specialize in all sorts of different areas within biochemical engineering.
Yeah, it's a really diverse field, which is great because you can find a niche that really speaks to your interests.
Like you could focus on pharmaceutical applications or work on developing new drug delivery systems using nanotechnology.
Or even work on engineering drought-resistant crops to help create a more sustainable food supply.
Exactly. The possibilities are pretty much endless. The guide even touched on the career outlook, and it's looking really promising. There's a growing demand for people who can bridge that gap between scientific discoveries and actually applying them in the real world, especially with the focus on things like personalized medicine and sustainability.
It's an exciting time to be in this field, that's for sure. There's so much potential to make a real impact.
It really sounds like it. Now, to make that impact, it all starts with a solid educational foundation, right? This guide specifically mentioned getting a strong grounding in biochemical engineering, but also highlighted related fields like chemical engineering, biology, or biotechnology as good starting points.
Exactly. Those can provide a really solid base.
It also sounds like hands-on experience is incredibly valuable, which is where those internships and co-op placements they mentioned come in.
Oh, absolutely. Getting real-world experience while you're still stuttering is so important.
Imagine being able to go into a job interview and confidently say, I've already worked on research projects in a university lab.
That would definitely make you stand out.
Totally. It shows initiative, a genuine interest. Now, what about those professional organizations that were mentioned, like the American Institute of Chemical Engineers or the Society for Biological Engineering? How can those be helpful?
Well, joining those kinds of groups can be a game changer for your career.
How so?
It's not just about adding another line to your resume. It's about plugging into a network of mentors and having access to resources and the very latest industry happenings. It's about becoming part of a community that's constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Speaking of which, the guide emphasized that one of the most important roles of a biochemical engineer is to design and optimize biochemical processes.
Huh.
What does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah, that seems pretty broad.
Well, think of it this way. A team of scientists might discover a promising new type of biofuel, right?
Huh?
But it's the biochemical engineers who figure out how to actually take that discovery from the lab and produce it on a large scale in a way that's feasible and cost-effective.
So they figure out how to make it efficient, cost-effective, and scalable to meet real-world demand.
Exactly. They're thinking about things like reaction rates, energy consumption, how to minimize waste, and even what the overall environmental impact will be. It requires a deep understanding of both the science and the engineering behind these really complex processes.
So it's about bridging that gap between having a really great idea and actually turning it into a workable solution.
Exactly.
Speaking of workable solutions, the guide also mentioned that biochemical engineers play a crucial role in developing things like bio-based materials.
Oh yeah, that's a really hot area right now.
It's incredible to think that we could be using plant-based materials to create things like biodegradable plastics, stronger building materials, even stuff that could replace traditional concrete.
The possibilities are pretty mind-blowing.
It's like we're talking about completely changing the materials we use to build our world. And speaking of changing the world, we can't forget about the role of technology in all of this. This guide mentions several cutting-edge tools that are completely transforming the field. CRISPR really caught my eye.
Yeah, CRISPR is a total game changer.
What is it exactly?
Imagine being able to go in and very precisely target and edit specific genes. It's like having a set of molecular scissors that let us rewrite the code of life itself.
Okay, that's seriously cool. What are the implications of being able to manipulate DNA that precisely?
It opens up a ton of possibilities. We could potentially treat genetic diseases, engineer crops to have better nutritional value, or even develop new types of diagnostic tools.
It sounds like a really powerful tool, one that has the potential to address some of the biggest challenges that we're facing.
Absolutely. But of course, with that power comes.
Great responsibility. Speaking of responsibility, the guide also mentioned that this field is not without its share of challenges. One thing that stood out was the intense competition for jobs, which makes sense.
Oh, for sure.
It's such a highly specialized field, so you're going up against some of the brightest minds out there. What else did the guide highlight as a potential downside?
It's definitely a field where you need to be prepared to really put yourself out there.
Absolutely. So beyond just the competition, what else did they mention?
Well, on top of that initial investment in your education,
Yeah.
you've got to be committed to lifelong learning. This field just never sits still.
Right. It's constantly evolving.
Exactly. You're always going to be hitting the books, going to conferences, and keeping up with the latest research. It's not a learn-it-once kind of career.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Now, because it's so specialized, the job market itself can be, I don't know, geographically concentrated.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The guide mentioned that certain cities or even just certain regions kind of emerge as hubs for these biotech and pharmaceutical companies.
It's true. So you might have to be open to relocating if you really want to pursue certain opportunities.
Your dream job might be on the other side of the world.
Exactly.
That's exciting, though, right? An adventure.
Exactly. A chance to see new places and experience new things.
Speaking of challenges, the guide also included some sample interview questions just to give you a taste of what to expect. Those always get you thinking.
Yeah, they give you a little glimpse into what employers are really looking for, what they really care about.
I remember one that was about designing experiments in biochemical engineering. What kind of answer do you think they'd be looking for with a question like that?
Well, I think it's not just about, being able to rattle off the steps of an experiment.
Right.
You really have to show that you understand all the nuances, like how to control the variables, analyze the data, troubleshoot when things go wrong. Because let's face it, they always do.
Right, because science is messy.
Exactly.
So you really need to be able to think critically, solve problems on the fly.
Absolutely. Maybe even walk them through a complex experiment that you actually worked on, highlighting the decisions you made and what you learned from the experience. That kind of real-world experience speaks volumes.
Oh, definitely. Show, don't tell.
Yeah.
I also remember a question about staying up to date with advancements in the field, which, as we've already said, is really important. So what would you say, how could you really impress them with your answer to that question?
I think it's about showing that you're not just like passively reading articles here and there, really trying to show that you're actively seeking out information and engaging with the latest research. So maybe talk about some specific journals that you follow religiously.
Yeah, be specific.
Exactly. Or maybe mention a recent study that you found particularly interesting or thought-provoking. Maybe talk about conferences you've attended or online communities where you discuss these groundbreaking new developments with other professionals in the field.
Right, because science is a conversation.
Exactly. Show them you're part of that conversation, that you're actively contributing to it.
I like it. Demonstrate that passion for lifelong learning. Now, the guide also mentioned the importance of making sure that your work meets all of the necessary regulatory requirements, which makes sense. But why is that such a big deal in this particular field?
Well, you got to think about what you're often dealing with. Genetically modified organisms, potentially dangerous materials, even in some cases human subjects. So there are a ton of really strict safety protocols and ethical considerations that you absolutely have to keep in mind.
So it's not just about the science itself, it's also about the safety and ethical implications of the work that you're doing.
Precisely. During an interview, you might want to mention some specific regulations that you're familiar with, like good manufacturing practices or different biosafety levels. It shows them that you understand just how important those guidelines really are.
It shows that you can be trusted to do things the right way. It's not just about getting results, it's about getting results responsibly. Okay. Now, shifting gears a bit, the guide also highlighted some exciting new trends that are shaping the job market for biochemical engineers. And one that really stood out to me was personalized medicine. It seems like that's what everyone's talking about these days.
It's definitely a hot topic.
So what's the connection to biochemical engineering?
Well, personalized medicine is all about using an individual's genetic makeup, their lifestyle, all these other personal factors to create medical treatments that are specifically tailored for them.
Yeah.
And biochemical engineers are the ones who are developing those personalized therapies.
So instead of having a one-size-fits-all drug, you might have a treatment that's designed specifically for your unique DNA.
Exactly. Biochemical engineers are developing the diagnostic tools that can identify the best course of treatment for each individual patient. They're also working on targeted drug delivery systems to get those treatments directly to where they need to go and to minimize those nasty side effects.
So you're talking about delivering a medication directly to a tumor, for example, instead of affecting the entire body. That's incredible. It sounds like something out of the future.
Well, the future is now. And
Yeah.
because it's such a new and rapidly developing field, there's a huge demand for skilled biochemical engineers to help make it a reality.
That's really exciting. Now, what other trends did you notice in the guide? What else stood out to you?
Well, sustainability is a really big one right now. Companies are looking for ways to create environmentally friendly bio-based solutions that can help us move away from things like petroleum-based plastics and fuels.
So biodegradable plastics made from plants.
Exactly. Or even building materials that are stronger and more eco-friendly than what we use now. And who's going to make that happen? Biochemical engineers.
It's like they're the architects of a greener future.
I like that, the architects of a greener future.
It's true, though. It's got to be incredibly rewarding to know that your work could have such a positive impact on the environment.
I'm sure it is. And because this whole sustainability trend is everywhere you look these days, it's creating all sorts of new and exciting career paths for biochemical engineers, renewable energy, bioremediation, sustainable agriculture, you name it.
It's like you could be on the front lines of creating a more sustainable future for everyone. Now, let's be honest. We've been talking a lot about these really big picture, world-changing possibilities, but the guide also mentioned something else that caught my eye. The salary for biochemical engineers, it sounds pretty appealing.
Yeah, it's definitely not bad. Of course, it varies depending on things like your experience, your location, and your specific role, but the median salary, it's already quite impressive.
So you're telling me that you can potentially earn a good living and do work that's intellectually stimulating and meaningful. Sign me up.
Right. Where do I sign?
Huh. But seriously, it's not just about the money, right? The guide also highlighted some of the intangible rewards of a career in this field. What are some of those?
Well, for many people, it's that thrill of scientific discovery. the challenge of solving really complex problems, and that deep satisfaction of knowing that the work you do is actually making a real difference in people's lives.
So you're not just stuck in a lab all day crunching numbers. You're actually out there making a real impact on the world.
Exactly. Whether you're developing a new medical treatment, creating a more sustainable food supply, or finding new ways to combat climate change, you're part of something so much bigger than yourself.
It's about really using your skills and your knowledge to make the world a better place, which is a pretty incredible feeling.
Absolutely. But let's be real, it's not always going to be easy. Even with all of the amazing potential rewards, there are also some challenges, some downsides, that anyone considering this career path really needs to be aware of.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What are some things that people might consider to be drawbacks of working in this field?
Well, for one thing, the work itself can be incredibly demanding. You're often working long hours, dealing with really tight deadlines, and there's a lot of pressure to produce results.
So it takes a certain type of personality, a certain level of dedication to really thrive in that kind of environment.
You've got to be able to handle stress and pressure and be comfortable with things constantly changing. And then there's the fact that you're going to face setbacks along the way.
Mm.
It's inevitable. Maybe a research project doesn't pan out the way you hoped, or a grant proposal gets rejected.
It's about having the resilience to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and keep going.
Exactly. You have to have that inner drive, that passion to keep you motivated even when things get tough. Now, another potential downside is the whole funding aspect. Securing the necessary funding to actually carry out your research projects can be a real struggle.
Right, because without funding, you can't really do much.
Exactly. And it's not always easy to come by. Researchers often have to spend a significant amount of time that they could be spending in the lab, writing grant proposals, basically trying to sell their ideas to potential funders.
It's almost like a whole separate job in itself, right?
Oh, absolutely. And even then, there's no guarantee that you'll be successful. Rejection is a very real part of this process.
So you need to be able to handle rejection, learn from it, and move forward.
Exactly. You can't let it get you down.
Now, despite these challenges, at the end of the day, a career in biochemical engineering can be incredibly rewarding. And we've talked about this, but it's important to remember those rewards, especially when things get tough.
Absolutely. Keep your eye on the prize. Remember why you got into this field in the first place.
Because it's about more than just the day-to-day work,
That's
right?
about the bigger picture.
It's about the intellectual stimulation, the collaboration, the potential to really make a difference in the world. Those are all incredibly powerful motivators.
They really are.
So for those who are up for the challenge, who are excited about science, about pushing the boundaries of what's possible, and who are driven to make a positive impact, this could be an incredibly fulfilling career path.
Absolutely. It's not for the faint of heart, but it can be incredibly rewarding.
Okay. Now, the guide also included a really interesting section on the day-to-day life of a biochemical engineer. And I think it's important to talk about this because when you hear biochemical engineer, it's easy to just picture someone in a lab coat surrounded by test tubes, but it's so much more than that, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. It's actually a surprisingly diverse and dynamic field. Your day-to-day could look completely different depending on your specific role in the industry you work in.
Okay, so for someone who's more research-focused, what might their day look like?
Well, they might spend their time designing experiments, analyzing data, collaborating with colleagues on new ideas.
So you're constantly learning, experimenting, pushing the boundaries of what we know about the world.
Exactly. And you might also be doing things like writing grant proposals, presenting your findings at conferences, even mentoring students.
So it's a good mix of hands-on work and more intellectual, collaborative work.
Absolutely. Now, if you're someone who works in a more industry-focused role, maybe at a biotech company or a pharmaceutical plant, your day might look pretty different.
Okay, what would that look like?
Well, you might be overseeing production processes, making sure everything is running smoothly and efficiently, troubleshooting any technical problems that come up, and of course, always making sure that everything is meeting those strict safety and quality standards.
Right, because in those environments, there's very little room for error. So it's a really nice balance of using your scientific knowledge, but also your problem solving and critical thinking skills to manage those real-world production environments.
Exactly. You might also be involved in designing new manufacturing processes or scaling up production to meet demand, or even developing new technology to make the whole process more sustainable and efficient.
So there are a lot of different directions you can go in. Now, speaking of directions, What about people who are thinking long term? What kind of career progression can someone in this field typically expect to see?
Well, there are tons of possibilities, which is exciting. If you're in a more research-oriented role, you might start as a research assistant, working your way up to leading your own lab, securing those big, prestigious research grants, even becoming a recognized expert in your particular niche.
So you could become a world-renowned researcher, publishing groundbreaking discoveries and presenting your work all over the world.
Exactly. It's definitely possible. Now, if you're more interested in the industry side, you could move into more senior leadership positions, things like managing projects, overseeing entire production teams, or even leading research and development departments for major companies.
So there's potential for both upward mobility and specialization within the field.
Absolutely. You can kind of carve out your own path, which is really cool. And then some biochemical engineers, they decide to transition into other roles altogether, like science communication, policy advising, or even teaching.
That's really interesting. So they use their expertise to maybe shape policy, educate others, or communicate about these complex scientific topics to a wider audience.
Exactly. So as you can see, a background in biochemical engineering can really open a lot of doors.
It sounds like it. Now, speaking of doors opening, the guide mentions some really incredible success stories of people who have, well, made it, people who have made major breakthroughs in biochemical engineering.
Oh yeah, and their stories are so inspiring. They really show you the kind of impact that's possible in this field.
Mhm.
One that really stuck with me was Dr. Frances Arnold, who actually won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for her work with directed evolution.
Okay, I have to admit, I haven't heard that term before. What is directed evolution?
So imagine being able to speed up evolution in a lab setting. That's essentially what she did. She developed this amazing technique to guide proteins to evolve and develop completely new functions, much, much faster than they would in nature.
So she found a way to direct the evolution of proteins.
Exactly. It's incredible, right?
Yeah.
And her work has had these amazing ripple effects in all sorts of different fields. We're talking everything from developing more efficient laundry detergents to creating brand new cancer drugs.
Wow. Okay, so from laundry detergent to life-saving medications.
You got it.
It just shows you how far-reaching and how impactful this field can truly be. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have any other examples of biochemical engineers who are really making waves in their fields?
Oh, there are so many. One that comes to mind is Dr. Robert Langer. He's considered to be one of the pioneers of tissue engineering.
Okay, I've heard that term before, tissue engineering, but to be honest, I don't fully understand what it is.
Well, it's basically what it sounds like. It's about engineering tissues. So he's made some pretty groundbreaking contributions to the development of biomaterials and drug delivery systems that can be used to repair or even replace damaged tissues and organs.
Wait, are we talking about growing organs in a lab?
That's exactly what we're talking
Like,
about.
that sounds like science fiction.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's becoming more of a reality all the time, thanks in large part to the work of people like Dr. Langer.
So how does that actually work?
Well, they're developing ways to grow new organs using patients' own cells, which is incredible when you think about it. This could completely revolutionize the way that we treat everything from severe burns to organ failure. It's amazing. And on top of that, he's also developed these incredible new drug delivery systems, things like biodegradable polymers that can release medication slowly over time, delivering it directly to the targeted area, which makes the treatments more effective and minimizes those unwanted side effects.
It's remarkable. And it really highlights how biochemical engineering is about more than just understanding the science. It's about taking that understanding and applying it to create real-world solutions that can really improve people's lives in tangible ways.
I couldn't said it better myself. And those are just two examples. There are so many other biochemical engineers out there who are making equally significant contributions in their fields. It's truly inspiring.
It really is. Now, for someone who's just starting out, who's just hearing about all of this for the first time, it can be a little overwhelming.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure it can.
So much information, so many possibilities. Where do you even begin?
Right.
So for those who are considering a career in this field, what advice would you give them? Where do they even start?
Well, I'd say first and foremost, embrace that curiosity.
Yeah.
Never stop asking questions. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty, literally.
Get your hands dirty, literally. What do you mean by that?
Well, lab work can be messy, sometimes smelly, but it's all part of the process. But really what I mean is don't be afraid to dive in, to experiment, to make mistakes, and learn from them. Get involved in research, find mentors who can guide you, and never, ever lose that passion for discovery.
I love that. It's about really immersing yourself in that world, fully embracing the learning process.
Exactly.
So, where do you actually begin? What are those first concrete steps? Because the guide also offered some very practical advice on how to actually launch a career in this field.
It does. It really does. And I think it's great advice. Like most things, it all starts with a solid educational foundation.
So, back to school, back to the books.
Pretty much. A bachelor's degree in biochemical engineering or something very closely related is usually the first step.
Okay. And then what about for people who are interested in specializing in a particular area or maybe pursuing a career in research? What then?
That's where a master's degree or even a PhD comes in. It really just depends on your goals and how far you want to take it.
So, it's important to do your research and figure out what's required for the specific path that you're most interested in.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Now, when you're in school, what are some of the most important skills that you should really focus on developing? What's going to set you up for success in this field?
Well, you're going to need a very strong foundation in math, chemistry, biology, and physics.
So, really understanding those fundamental building blocks of life and how they all interact.
Precisely. And then, of course, you'll need a solid understanding of engineering principles, things like thermodynamics, fluid mechanics, reactor design, that kind of thing.
So, it's about taking that deep scientific knowledge and combining it with those practical engineering skills that will allow you to actually design, build, and optimize those processes.
Yes. And as important as those academic credentials are, don't underestimate the value of hands-on experience.
Right. It's one thing to read about something in a textbook, but it's a totally different thing to actually apply that knowledge in a real-world setting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
While you're in school, look for research opportunities, internships, or even volunteer positions in labs or companies that align with your interests.
Build up your resume, get that practical experience that will really showcase your skills and your passion to potential employers.
Exactly. And while you're at it, don't be shy. Network.
Network, as in talk to people.
Yes. Go to conferences, join student organizations, connect with the professors, reach out to people on LinkedIn. You never know where those connections might lead.
It's about putting yourself out there, building relationships, learning from people who are already working in the field.
Exactly. And you know what? Finding a good mentor can make all the difference.
A mentor, someone to kind of guide you and offer advice as you navigate the ups and downs of a career in biochemical engineering.
Exactly. A mentor can offer invaluable insights, support, and even open some doors for you that you might not have even known existed.
So how do you find a mentor? Do you just walk up to someone and ask them?
It's not quite that simple, but it's also not as intimidating as it might seem. Just remember that mentorship is a two-way street. You're bringing your own unique skills, perspectives, and experiences to the table.
So it's about finding someone that you connect with, someone who's willing to share their expertise, and also someone who you can learn from and grow with.
Exactly. It's a mutually beneficial relationship.
I like that. It's about finding someone who can be your champion, your sounding board, and your guide as you navigate the challenges and celebrate the successes.
Perfectly said. Now, this guide does a really great job of highlighting all the exciting positive things about this field. But I think it's only fair to acknowledge that every career path, this one included, has its own unique set of challenges. And biochemical engineering is no exception.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What are some of those challenges? What are some of the potential downsides that someone might encounter if they decide to pursue this as a career? Because we want to be realistic.
Of course, we want to paint a complete picture.
Exactly. So what are some things that people should be prepared for?
Well, one of the biggest challenges, and we touched on this a bit earlier, is just the incredibly competitive nature of this field.
Right, because it is growing so quickly, but it's also still relatively specialized, so there are a lot of people vying for those same positions.
Exactly. And that competition can be fierce, especially when you get to the graduate level and you're trying to secure those really coveted research or industry positions. So what can you do? Well, you need to excel academically, obviously.
So good grades are important.
They really are. Maintain a high GPA, take challenging courses that push you outside of your comfort zone, and look for research opportunities that will help you stand out from the crowd.
It's about demonstrating that you're not just going through the motions. You're really passionate about this field, and you're willing to go the extra mile.
Exactly. And you know what else can make a big difference? Extracurricular activities.
Really? Even things that aren't directly related to biochemical engineering?
Yes. Don't underestimate the value of being a well-rounded person.
So joining student clubs, volunteering in your community, things like that.
Exactly. Those experiences, they might not seem directly relevant to your career, but they can tell a potential employer a lot about you.
Right. It shows that you're not just a robot who's good at science. You're a human being who cares about the world around you, who has interests and passions.
Exactly. It shows that you're a go-getter. And speaking of which, you have to have passion.
Because it's not always going to be easy, right? You're going to hit roadblocks. You're going to want to give up sometimes.
That's true. There will be long hours, setbacks, experiments that just don't work out the way you hoped they would.
It's about having that fire in your belly, that genuine love for the work that you do to really carry you through those challenging times.
I completely agree. Passion is essential. It's what motivates you to find solutions when it seems like there aren't any. It's what pushes you to keep going when you'd rather just throw in the towel. And you know what else? It's important to be able to handle rejection. Because in this field, you're going to face it.
Rejection, as in your research gets rejected or your job applications get rejected.
Yes, all of that. It's part of the game.
It's tough, but it's true. So how do you deal with that?
Resilience, that's the key. You have to develop a thick skin. Because if you let every rejection get to you, it's going to be tough to keep going.
It's about learning to view those rejections not as failures, but as opportunities for growth.
Exactly. It's about getting that feedback, figuring out what you can do better next time, and then using that to improve. Now, in addition to that competitive nature and the inevitable rejections, there are a couple other things that could be considered downsides.
Okay, let's talk about those. What else is there?
Well, the work-life balance in this field, especially in certain roles and industries, can be tough.
Right, we touched on that earlier, but it's worth repeating because if you're someone who values a very strict 9 to 5, this might not be the best fit.
Exactly. Long hours, weekend work, even overnight shifts. It's not uncommon, especially if you're working in a research lab or a manufacturing facility, where those processes might need constant monitoring.
And then there's also the possibility of travel, right? Depending on what you do.
Oh, for sure. You might have to travel to conferences, to collaborate with colleagues at other institutions, or even to visit manufacturing plants or field sites.
So it's important to have that realistic picture in mind. Understand the potential demands on your time. Make sure that they align with your own personal goals, with your priorities.
Absolutely. You have to set those boundaries. And then, of course, there's always the challenge of securing funding, which we talked about a bit earlier.
Funding, the lifeblood of research.
It really is. And getting that funding isn't always easy. It can be incredibly competitive. And it's something that researchers often have to spend a lot of time and energy on.
It's like a constant hustle.
It can be. You have to be very persuasive, very persistent, and even then, there are no guarantees.
Right. But even with all of those challenges, all of those potential downsides, at the end of the day, a career in biochemical engineering can be incredibly rewarding, both personally and professionally.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Don't let those challenges overshadow the incredible potential of this field.
Right.
The intellectual stimulation, the collaborative spirit, the opportunity to make a real difference, those are all incredibly valuable and rewarding aspects of this career path.
It's about finding that balance, right? Recognizing the challenges, but focusing on the bigger picture.
Exactly. And speaking of the bigger picture, one thing that really resonated with me in this guide was the section on the overall impact of biochemical engineering.
Right. Because as much as we've been talking about, the nitty-gritty of the job, the skills you need, the education requirements, at the end of the day, this field is about something so much bigger than that.
It really is. This is a field that has the potential to change the world as we know it.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a minute and talk about that. What kind of impact are we talking about? What are some of the areas where biochemical engineering is really making a difference?
Well, we've already touched on a few. Healthcare is a big one, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Biochemical engineers are at the forefront of developing new drugs, new therapies, new ways to diagnose and treat diseases. And it's not just about treating the symptoms anymore. It's about going deeper, understanding the underlying mechanisms of disease at a molecular level, and then developing targeted therapies that address those root causes.
It's about really understanding how things work down to the tiniest detail, and then using that knowledge to develop more effective and more personalized treatments.
Precisely. And then there's the whole area of sustainability, which we also talked about a bit.
Right. Developing more sustainable manufacturing practices, finding alternatives to fossil fuels, creating bio-based materials that are biodegradable and less harmful to the environment.
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of food security. As the global population continues to grow, We're going to need to find ways to produce more food, more efficiently, and more sustainably.
And that's where biochemical engineering comes in.
Exactly. Biochemical engineers are working to develop genetically modified crops that are more resistant to pests and diseases, that require less water and fewer pesticides, and that are more nutritious. They're also developing new methods for food preservation and processing that can help reduce food waste, which is a huge problem.
It's remarkable. It really is about tackling some of the biggest challenges facing our planet.
It is. And it's not just about addressing existing problems, it's also about looking ahead, anticipating future challenges, and developing innovative solutions before those challenges become crises.
It's about proactively shaping a better future, a more sustainable future for everyone.
Precisely. And that's what I find so exciting about this field. There's so much potential, so much possibility. It's really about using our ingenuity, our creativity, and our scientific knowledge to make a positive impact on the world around us. And that's a pretty amazing thing to be a part of.
It's like that old saying, many hands make light work. And in a field like biochemical engineering where collaboration is so important, that's definitely true.
It really is. It's about combining your own individual expertise with the knowledge and the skills of the entire team to achieve something that you could never achieve on your own.
It's about being more than just a brilliant scientist. It's about being a team player, a communicator, a problem solver.
Exactly. And those are all skills that will serve you well in any career, but especially in one that's as dynamic and interdisciplinary as this one.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of biochemical engineering, what are some final thoughts you want to leave with our listener? What are the most important takeaways about this field?
I think if there's one big takeaway, it's that biochemical engineering has just incredible potential to really address some of the most pressing challenges that we're facing in the world today. We've talked about healthcare, sustainability, food security, all of these critical areas where biochemical engineers are really at the forefront of finding those solutions.
It's about using science, using engineering, not just to understand those problems, but to actually do something about them.
Exactly. It's about making a tangible difference. And I know for someone who's just starting out, it can seem a bit overwhelming.
Right, because there's so many different directions you can go, so many different problems to tackle.
It's true, but that's also what makes it so exciting.
Right, it's like you're standing at the edge of something huge, something that has the potential to change the world as we know it.
Exactly. And as helpful as this guide is, and I do think it provides a really great roadmap, I think the most important thing is to never lose that sense of wonder, that excitement, that drive to explore.
Never stop asking questions, never stop pushing those boundaries, never stop being curious.
Exactly. The world needs more curious minds, more creative thinkers, more people who are passionate about using their skills and their knowledge to make a difference.
And who knows, maybe our listener will be the one to make the next big breakthrough in biochemical engineering.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. There's so much potential still out there, just waiting to be unlocked.
Well, on that inspiring note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive into the world of biochemical engineering. We've covered so much ground, from the very technical aspects, like the skills you need and the different career paths you can take, to some of the bigger picture things, like the challenges and rewards that come with dedicating your life to such a demanding, but ultimately incredibly rewarding field.
It's been a real pleasure talking about all of this with you.
Likewise, the pleasure was all mine. And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you a clearer picture of what it takes to succeed in this challenging, but ultimately incredibly rewarding field.
And remember, the future is brimming with possibilities. It's really up to each of us to shape that future, using our curiosity, our ingenuity, our dedication, and our unwavering determination to really make a difference in the world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Mm.
So on that note, we'll sign off for now. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into those topics that really fascinate you.